Hi, my name is Tom Wing. I'm a writer, and this is The Written Scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host, I am the producer, I'm the creator, and I'm all the things, I guess you can say. Welcome to the show. If you're new here, what we do is we talk to authors about path and process about writing. If you are an old bee, as I like to say, then welcome back, and I'm glad you have returned. Today's guest is, it's so interesting. I don't know how I have gotten on a roll with Acorn Publishing authors, but I've got another one, and I'm so excited. I guess that's a testament to just how good of a company they are as far as putting out some really fantastic authors. So we've got another one on the couch, as I like to say today. So Tom, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thomas or Tom? What do you prefer?
I go by Tom. I used the Thomas because there are actually 7 other Thomas M. Wings in the United States.
Of course there are. Yeah. Are any of them writers?
Not that I know of yet.
No? Okay. To start, I want to talk about what you are recently doing and what you've been doing. Your recent book is In Harm's Way. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That one just came out on April 10th.
April 10th. Wow, that's very recent as far as when this recording is.
Yeah.
But that's got to feel good, yeah?
It does. I opened the box with the proof copies about a week and a half ago or so, and it was just as exciting opening the box as the first time.
Yeah.
I had lunch with my editor this week, and I told her that, and she said, "Don't worry, I published 38 books. It never gets old."
Never gets old. Oh, that's got to be great. I remember getting up my first stack of books with my first one, and I was like, these are mine, and it was just like, it's a good feeling. It really is. What's the book about?
So this one is set during the American Revolution. Jonas Hawk is a sea captain. He's a merchant captain in the colonies. It's October 1775. He comes back from a year-long voyage to Batavia, now Java, with a cargo that should set him up reasonably well.
Yeah.
His father-in-law owns a ship, and his ship is seized by the Royal Navy. So he finds himself in Norfolk, Virginia, in the midst of a growing rebellion, and he has to try and figure out how he's going to protect and support his family. And he has to figure out what it means to protect and support his family. Initially, he doesn't want to choose sides, but eventually he has to.
Yeah.
We always do.
That life it is. How much of that is accurate setting, and how much of it is play?
100% of the setting is accurate.
Okay.
Including the ship that seizes his ship.
Really? Okay.
I took the HMS Otter, who was a sloop that was predatory in the Norfolk area during that time frame, and I actually used her commander, and I read enough about her commander to be able to characterize, I think, him accurately.
Yeah.
But all the events, I like to take my characters and I drop them into historical events, and then I try not to modify the events. I think there's a raid, a British Navy raid on Hampton, Virginia at one point, and I may have modified the time by a couple of hours.
Okay.
But everything else was true to what the British actually did.
Okay.
And I'd rather see my characters react to actual historical events.
Of course. Yeah. It's amazing. A couple hundred years later, I'm going to see the Grateful Dead in Hampton Coliseum. But anyway.
Oh, cool.
That's my connection to Hampton. But so you don't try to change the historical event. You just put people in it.
I do.
Okay.
And my characters come alive. This is kind of strange to say, perhaps, but I know a lot of other writers say the same thing. So occasionally they will wink at me and say, "Hey, watch this," and they'll go off and do things I didn't expect. And so I find that dropping them in the middle of a real event, I get good reactions from them. And they interact sometimes with historical people, like that CO of the HMS Otter, but I get better stories out of it.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think it's taking the human element, and I think you get a more accurate representation of how people would have reacted or potentially would have reacted back then.
Yeah.
And I think you get a better look at humanity and how humans act and react that way than if you're completely fictionalizing historical events and driving the plot instead of letting real events drive your characters.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. I guess I never really looked at it that way, because I know through a lot of historical, alternative history stuff,
Mhm.
that the characters' actions are kind of driven by the change in the setting. But you prefer to have the setting sort of drive almost your characters, or the opposite. The characters live in the setting, and the setting is just there and always has been.
I do, yeah. Actually, my late writing mentor, who was my late cousin's husband, he wrote alternate history of the Civil War. He finished 2 of the trilogy before he passed, and I worked with him on both for the maritime scenes because he had substantial naval presence in it.
Yeah.
And he did exactly what you said. He had his characters, what he wanted his characters to do, to a large extent, drove the plot. And his events were obviously, they started deviating and then they became substantially different, and then he was making them up from whole cloth. And I found it fascinating because I too like alternate histories, but I probably won't dabble in that, just because I like seeing how my characters react in the real world.
How much research do you have to do in what life was like for the characters' actions to be believable?
Oh my goodness. That's where I get wrapped around an axle. This book actually took 25 years to finish.
Really?
And it's out on the shelf for a couple of years.
Okay.
There were some hiatuses based on, deployments and mobilizations for the Navy and that kind of stuff. But and then it sat for about 5 years. And I wasn't sure I was going to return to it because I had written the other book that came out first in 2016. I came back to it thinking, maybe there are parts I can salvage, maybe I can reuse it. And I did pretty substantial revisions a couple times.
Okay.
But I presented it to my editor and to another editor friend, and they both liked it. And so I went ahead and pursued it. But historical research is definitely one of the things that delayed it. I will get wrapped around the axle. I spent about half an hour talking to another writer, he's actually pretty well known, of that period, on when the title changed for the galley stove on a ship from caboose to Charlie Noble.
Oh my goodness.
And I will spend, for the Battle of Hampton, I spent, I would say, 4 or 5 hours reading different accounts, contemporary accounts on what happened and who was involved. And then because I make this main character into a privateer, I have spent hours reading books on privateering, including a history that was written in the 1870s.
I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate going down rabbit holes. I was working on a novel that I ended up going down a rabbit hole of how to fly a space shuttle.
Oh wow, that would be interesting,
right? And I got a book on it. And then I was like, I am going too far with this. Like, why am I doing this? I'm going way too far with it. So I had to step away from that ledge. But I understand that, well, if this is going to happen, well, then I have to know how this happened. But if that's going to happen, then I have to know how this happened, and it just, it goes.
It builds on itself.
It really does.
The hard part is knowing what you did. You realized you needed to step away. And the hard part is knowing when to step away.
When to step away, yeah.
I can't remember the author's name, and I need to look her up. There was a woman that I read whose book was fantastic. She had gotten down to the level of detail that she had one of her characters scrambling eggs, and this was written about the same time. It was late 1790s, I think, was when hers was set. And she had done enough research to find out that what they did was they seized together a bunch of apple tree twigs, and that's what they used
like a whisk.
Like a whisk, yes, exactly.
Oh,
it was an apple tree whisk.
So you got to know these things. If you're going to write about that time period, you got to know about it. I think that might be the fun of that sci-fi writers get, is that they can just make it up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't know if it works, but we're going to make it work in the story.
But then they have to try and figure out consistency across their world and change.
That is very true.
They may change the law of physics, but that physics has to stay consistent.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
David Weber does a really good job with that.
Yeah, I love these little things about writing. The depth of what we have to know before we write the story. The frame of this book is different than your previous book.
Very.
Yeah, very. How difficult was it to write about a period of time that you weren't really in? I know you've done the research, but you weren't around 200 years ago. So how difficult was it to write something about that?
There were parts of it that were quite difficult, the parts that required a great deal more research. I've always, since I was in grade school, I've always read histories, and my focus was on early American history, especially early American naval history.
Okay.
I read a fair amount about the Revolutionary War. War of 1812 was something I read extensively about. And then World War II. And then there were some counter-piracy operations in the 1820s that one of my favorite historical characters were involved in. And so I read about those. So it was less difficult, perhaps, than for someone who doesn't have that background.
Yeah.
I hesitate, but occasionally I'll call myself an amateur historian.
That's all right. You're allowed, I think. I think you've done enough hours to be an amateur historian.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That's that imposter syndrome coming out.
Yeah.
It was a little bit more difficult than the book that I wrote most recently, or the first one.
Because you had kind of lived through some things. I think that you could have put in that first book.
I did, however. I will caveat by saying that the first book was set during modern day. It could be tomorrow or the next day.
Got it. Okay.
And some events actually were yesterday and the day before.
Okay. It's a good kind of story.
Yeah. Sort of. Yeah. But I had not served. I had done short trips on the more modern warships.
Okay.
But all of my the ships I'd been assigned to were older, dating from the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Okay.
So I had to, in a way, I had to insert myself into something I was less familiar with for that book as well.
Yeah.
But yes, the naval background and the understanding of how things work shipboard, those kinds of things, I did have that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, my next question was, were you reading the kind of books you want to write? And it sounds like you kind of were a little bit.
I do. Yeah. I avid Tom Clancy fan.
Yeah.
George Galdarese, who actually worked where I retired from, and I got to know him pretty well, got to be friends with him. He writes the Tom Clancy Op Center books now.
Okay. Yeah.
On behalf of the estate.
I've read a few of those.
There you go.
Yeah,
so
back in the day. Yeah.
And they were very popular.
They were.
Yeah.
They were.
And I read historical fiction too.
Okay.
So, and science fiction. So I read across the genres.
Even as a kid, you were into those kind of stories, yeah? Yeah. Where did that come from? Were your parents introducing you to things or finding it on your own? How did you come across those stories?
A little of both. I think probably. So my dad particularly had a substantial library.
Yeah.
I think when we inherited it, it was somewhere around 5,000 volumes.
Oh my goodness.
I still have probably close to 1,000 of them.
Okay.
But it ranged from, he had first editions of General Grant's memoirs to he had most of Isaac Asimov's science fiction and other, at the time, big names from the 40s and 50s in science fiction and 60s.
Yeah.
So I had access to
all
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we had a good library.
I was going to ask if you went to the library a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Mom would go to Safeway and I'd go to the public library across the street.
Who wants to help with groceries? I'm going to go read.
That's right.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Don't mind me. I'll be over here. I would go help my mother with groceries because I would get a Matchbox car if I helped.
Oh, I didn't have that option.
That's how I was bribed. To help with groceries. And I did, but I also made sure to read.
Should go back in time and have your mom talk to mine.
Right. We'll work on that. Well, that's a different kind of story, I think.
Yes.
So I also read that you sort of hid your writing from others.
I did. And if anyone out there is listening and wants to be a writer, here's what I encourage you to do. Don't do what I did.
Don't do it.
I wrote, I didn't really begin writing a lot until high school or maybe after the Naval Academy.
Okay.
But I always told myself stories and I wrote some of them down. My wife, for the first year we were married, didn't know I was writing.
Yeah.
I sold a story about the third year of our marriage to a local paper here in San Diego, the Omega Chronicles.
Okay.
And that was the first time she really knew that I was serious about it.
Oh, interesting.
And then I continued writing. I did take a children's writing course in 95. She knew about that, but she didn't know how much I was writing.
Okay.
Probably until the late 90s, early 2000s. And I didn't show my fiction to anyone else until about 2010-ish
Yeah.
when I showed it to my late writing mentor. And I expected him to tell me I had no chance, that, it was garbage. He said later he expected to tell me that it was garbage and that I should go find something else to do.
Right.
But he encouraged me. He said that it had merit. And so I kept writing. I showed him this story, in fact, and I kept writing. I kept polishing. I started going to writers' conferences. And most important, sharing it with other people and getting feedback.
Yes.
Feedback that you trust.
Yeah.
And feedback that is honest. But you got to have that outside eye to look at what you're writing.
You really do. It's really important to have other people in your circle, other writers too, not just people, but writers.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you a little surprised at all at some of the things you discovered once you started sharing your writing with other people?
The biggest thing was probably the getting compliments, because I certainly didn't expect that.
Yeah.
I have a significant case of imposter syndrome, but I think that probably the largest surprise was that both my editor and my late writing mentor expressed surprise themselves that without any real formal training, I could create a structure that made sense to them.
Yeah.
There was a lot about craft that I still had to learn. Building characters, dialogue was a nightmare for me until I started doing what they recommended, which was going to coffee shops and listening in on people's conversations.
Yep. Yeah.
And people don't talk the way you would write dialogue. You write dialogue in full sentences, right? No, you don't. You write dialogue the way people talk, which is in half-finished thoughts and contractions and half-finished sentences.
Yeah, I hate, this is going to sound weird, but I love eavesdropping sometimes. It is.
Yes.
It is such a good way. It's such a good character study. It's so. I love writing dialogue. One of my favorite things about writing stories is if I could write a story just all in dialogue, I would. And if I could get away with it at least. So I appreciate that they gave you that advice to go out and do that.
It makes it so much easier.
It really
and
does.
You're right. You can use what you hear to help refine your characters, because I know what my characters think and I know how they'll react in emergency situations, but I get attitudes. And the other thing I get is facial expressions and fidgets and somebody sucking their teeth or tapping their nose, those kinds of things that you just can't get anywhere else.
And those are really, I don't want to say crucial details, but they're really important when telling a story to give you and just an idea of the type of person that character is. Just the tapping of the nose. Maybe they're a fidgety person, or maybe they're anxious or whatever. Those little details are so useful.
Yeah, I agree. And when you read a story, when somebody has those kinds of characteristics, like their leg is shaking all the time, those kinds of things, you get an insight. You're right. You get an insight into the character and how they may behave in a certain way.
Yeah, it's such. I love that stuff. It's so much fun. I love writing. Everything about it.
It's a great fourth career for me. Yes,
fourth career. Why did you hide writing?
Fear.
Yeah,
it was
just the imposter syndrome stuff.
Yeah, it was the imposter syndrome stuff.
Okay.
I'll be honest. I grew up in North Idaho. I was that damned Californian for my entire life up there.
I have a friend who's buried in Lewiston.
Okay, yeah. I've been to Lewiston a number of times.
I've been there once, actually. But anyway, sorry.
It's a part of the state that's a little more friendly than the
rest
part I grew up in.
Yeah.
But
Idaho's a little weird right now, but that's okay. A lot of places are weird right now.
It is. I grew up in a beautiful place.
Yeah. It's gorgeous out there. The Snake River, all of it. It's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
And I grew up on the largest freshwater lake other than the largest and deepest other than the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And so I got plenty of boating experience.
Oh, yeah.
Which, that was good for me.
Yeah.
And my best friend still lives up there in the house that he grew up in.
Fun.
He left for about 30 years, joined the Navy, all that stuff, but he's back there. But it led me to have, shall we say, some self-confidence issues, which the Navy worked on.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I felt much more comfortable with who I am that I was willing to let other people read those kinds of things. Because when you're a writer, when you first share your words,
So
your written
scary.
words, it's like standing on a stage in Wembley Stadium or SoFi,
Mm-hmm.
and you're naked and everybody's staring at you.
It's
And it's a full house.
It really is. I'll tell you what helps. Not besides sharing it, obviously, but what helps is becoming a poet and having to get up in front of a microphone and read your poem in front of people.
I do not think I could do that. My hat's off to you.
That I think
I salute you.
has changed my ability to do things in front of people.
I can see that.
Yeah. I still can't dance and won't dance in front of people, but I'll get up there and read some stories or poetry. I have no problem with it anymore.
My hat's off
so,
to you. Yeah.
but
And I could see that making a big difference.
it definitely helps. It definitely helps. Would you go back and jump on the writer's path a lot earlier if you could?
I would, yes.
Yeah.
Once I got that story published in 91, I would continue to write and to try and sell.
Yeah.
I think it would make a difference. I would certainly be a better writer
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
than I was back then. I needed to keep writing. And I guess that's my other lesson learned is I took a lot of breaks from
Mhm.
writing,
Mm-hmm.
many of them multi-year breaks,
Yeah.
and I could have been much better than I am now had I kept doing that.
It's so interesting how we can just kind of lose that, just step right off that path, you know. And because I did the same thing. If I had stuck with it,
Mm-hmm.
who knows where I could have been with books right now? You know, I knew I always wanted to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Life got in my way.
Yes, that's exactly what
Yeah.
happens, and I would advise myself, my younger self, to stick with it,
Yeah.
and I would advise anybody who's listening to stick with it and keep doing it, whether you show it to somebody or not.
Just do it.
Just write it.
Yeah.
You were a better writer today than you were yesterday, and you will be a better one tomorrow,
As long as you stick with it.
as long as you stick with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you stop writing, it's just another muscle that can atrophy. You know, you gotta keep going with it.
Yeah.
You have one kid, or do you have?
I have one.
One. Did you not push, but did you kind of say, hey, stick with it? You know, if this is what you really want to do, stick with it. Did you try to?
Yeah. My wife and I have both emphasized to her that sticking with it is really important.
Yeah.
And she does. She's an artist. She's taking degree in 2D animation. When she's focused on her art, she can sit for hours
Yeah.
and just do it. And so we encourage that in her. You know, we were not the kind of parents who, hey, you need to get out of the room. Come on out.
Go
You know, if
play or something. Yeah.
Yeah. If she's reading or she's doing art, we let her do it.
Yeah.
Within reason. We made her
of course.
eat and drink.
That helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to go to the bathroom too.
That was
sometimes.
important.
Yeah. All those things.
Yeah.
It was supported early on for me, and I feel very lucky in that. You know, I was raised by a she hates when I say this, a baby boomer mother, and so it was the get a job, save for retirement kind of a life.
Yeah.
You know, like that's what she did. You know, and that's what worked back then. But you know, so it was always pushed onto me, but still, she was always like, read a lot, write a lot, do it all, just get a job. Kind of a thing. So I think that was pretty common back then. I wonder if that's changing now. Do you notice parenting styles are different with that?
Within my daughter's friend group, I think it probably has.
Yeah.
My parents both grew up in the Depression. Actually, my dad was in his 20s during the Depression, so
Wow.
they had slightly different perspectives, but they were very focused on getting a job, working hard. Did not matter what you were doing, whether you really liked it or not. You had to do
work.
it.
Yeah. There must have been. I mean, obviously, opportunities were probably. I wonder if there were less opportunities for doing different things back then.
There were, especially
Yeah.
for women.
Right.
My
Yeah.
mom had a completely different perspective on that kind of thing.
Yeah.
My dad was much more. He didn't fit the mold for that time frame because he always encouraged my sisters to do whatever they wanted to do, and they could be whoever they wanted to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see in my daughter's parents a lot more encouragement of whatever their passion is, and maybe that's the small group, because it's not a very large group. It's 5 or 6 sets of parents, but I did not see that growing up. My friend group, the parents were about, you're not only going to get a job, but you're going to inherit the farm that we own, and
too,
you're going to be the next generation, and your kids will be the generation after that.
Yeah. And that's what you did.
That's what you
That's
did,
what you did,
especially
what you
in rural
knew.
communities.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure, especially out there. I spent 8 years in Iowa, and I met plenty of families who had been on that farm for generations. So it's what you did.
Yeah, and if you wanted to become a black sheep of the family, you
left.
pushed back and you left.
You moved to the city.
Yeah, you might not be welcome home.
Right. Yeah. It's very different. Very different. While you were in the military, did you have time to write, and if you weren't, or I guess if you were you formulating stories in your head during that? Were you always trying to stay creative mentally, at least?
I did, and it wasn't the conscious effort, but I was making up stories on a bridge watch that runs from midnight to 4 a.m. when there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
I would be talking to my junior officer deck or some of the enlisted guys, or I would be standing there making up stories.
Okay.
And it was probably 50-50, which I was doing.
Yeah.
Shipboard underway, I did not have time to write because it was a competition. Hey, I got 4 hours of sleep last night. I got you beat. I got 3 hours.
3 hours. Yeah.
But in port, there was time. I didn't always take it, and I wish I had.
You wish you had. Yeah. What? I don't know if this question matters, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What were you doing instead?
Typically working, or if this might sound bad, but once my wife and I got married, we got married pretty young. I was out of the academy for about 5 years, and she was out by 2 years. And the only reason we waited that long was because we were both on deployment. We would play computer games at home from about 8 o'clock until 1 o'clock in the morning or so, and then we'd go to work.
Okay.
And we were much more spontaneous.
Yeah.
We liked to do things like, hey, it's going to be a 3-day weekend. Let's go up to Yosemite. And this is on Friday morning.
Okay. Yeah.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to get away from the ship and away from everything else.
Yeah.
So those kinds of choices. Let's see, Yosemite or sitting down in front of an Apple IIc computer.
I remember those. We had an Apple IIe.
I remember those too.
Yeah, we had the 2E. I think we probably had a 2C laying around. But yeah, I remember the 2E. Yeah. Anyway, I like to ask questions about what people were doing if they weren't writing, because I know that there are times where I will go to bed at night and think, instead of watching an hour of YouTube, why wasn't I writing? But I also think maybe I needed that hour of YouTube. So I'm always curious if people, they needed that time, just a way to do nothing, or if they regret not writing, or maybe both. Who knows?
For me, it's both. Yeah. This past couple weeks, I've got a lot of other things going on, and so I have not written as much, and I have sat and watched 2 or 3 episodes of, I can't remember Warehouse 13.
Okay.
But I do feel guilty while I'm doing it, and then I think to myself, I apparently need this mental break.
There's a reason for it, yeah.
So let's just enjoy the story and the characters.
Yeah. No, that downtime is equally important. A lot of people talk about how you should always be writing, and yeah, you should write a lot, but you need to take time away. When you're too much away, when you take too much time away, do you feel it physically or mentally? Have you reached that point yet?
I do. I feel it mentally.
Yeah.
I start to, when I do sit down, it doesn't feel comfortable.
Yes.
It feels a little bit awkward.
Forced,
and it's hard.
Maybe?
It feels forced.
Yeah.
On the other end of it, if you're sitting down every day and forcing yourself to write for an hour and it starts to feel forced, then you do need to take that break. So there's a balance somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
As a naval reservist, we used to say your life was in perfect balance if the Navy, your job, your civilian job, and your wife are all angry with you. Writing is kind of similar. If your characters are bored or angry, and you're feeling like you're forcing it, then you're not in balance.
You're not in balance. Oh, that's interesting. So, hey, look, the Navy had some interesting sayings that lasted a long time. That entered the common vernacular for sure.
That's actually a fun thing about writing naval books. Yes.
Oh yeah, you get to use all those things, huh? Yeah. That would be fun. There's a lot of jargon. I don't know if my dad used a lot of it on us, but I remember learning a lot of jargon from that. after retirement, how natural did it feel to be doing something that was relatively creative, based on, that actually has very few constraints? Because I would think, being in the Navy, you've got these regulations and constraints, even the crease of your pants, like all those things. So with writing, you didn't really need that.
No, it was actually kind of freeing. I did 15 years of reserve, 17 active, and so as a reservist, I was employed by the Navy as a federal civil servant.
Yeah.
And so I was a little bit more free. But what I found was the technical writing that I was doing in that job reading was actually to a degree hampering my creative writing.
Why was
I found
that?
it more difficult. I'm not exactly sure. I think in my brain, and I've talked to other people, and a few have said, yeah, they feel the same thing.
Yeah.
And others have said, it didn't make any difference at all.
Okay.
For me, in my brain, the way it's wired, focusing on the technical side, which is a different side of the brain, it didn't stunt it, but it hampered my ability to dive deep into the other side.
Be creative and
be
imaginative.
Creative, yeah. So once I retired, it was easier.
It was easier, yeah. I did a podcast series for MIT, and we talked about professional communication for grad students because they really needed it. And it was, a lot of them talked about, the people we talked to, a lot of them mentioned how sometimes the jargon or the specificity of things can really be too much of a border, or too much of a bumper, or a hamper. It can really pen you in, so it's easier sometimes to just kind of step away from that jargon and explain it in a layman's terms if you can.
That actually makes me think of, I think that may be one of the reasons I published the modern naval fiction first, because it was easier to step into that jargon-bound, very modern military setting than it was the Age of Sail. I mean, I do have a pretty good background in sailing, and including larger sailing ships.
Yeah.
But I think that step was easier. That's a really good point. I'll have to think about that one.
Yeah, because I would think you went into this writing the modern stuff with your current, as we were talking earlier, you lived through it, so you had it right there, right. So, when you start filling your head with writing, copywriting, basically I feel like that imaginative side gets a little stunted. I've asked teachers about this, who've gone through, or other people who've gone through grad school and PhDs or whatever, if they thought that sometimes there can be too much education and it can actually hinder that creative spark, because you're so focused on the way to do it, kind of a thing,
Yeah, I think watching the kids that I grew up with and watching my daughter's friend set, I do think that, and it's very teacher dependent, but I do think that especially English classes do tend to stunt some of the creative juices that should and could be flowing in those cases. I was very fortunate and had some really good English teachers.
That helps.
It does. I had a couple that were a little bit more focused on no, you don't move away from the rules ever under any circumstance.
Sure.
You have to know the rules. And I wish I'd come up with this, but you have to know the rules, but you have to be able to depart smartly from them.
Mm-hmm. And
they were not willing to entertain that option.
Yeah. There was no other way. This is how it's done.
That's right.
Kind of thing. Yeah. That can be tough. That can be tough. Speaking of the jargon stuff, how difficult was it to make sure that your readers still understood it? You know what I'm saying? Putting it in there and making sure that, maybe I should explain it, or are you worried about over explaining it or whatever?
That I did worry about all of those things.
Yeah.
I had a couple of good inspirations, and I took a really good workshop a couple times from the same lady. So James L. Nelson was my inspiration to write the kind of historical fiction that I've started to write.
Okay.
He was second mate aboard a sailing ship, HMS Rose, that is now the Maritime Museum in San Diego, called HMS Surprise.
Okay.
My wife and I sailed aboard her for a week once as part of the crew. He writes a lot of jargon and uses a lot of the sailing terms, but he weaves in the explanation in such a an easy way for readers to pick up on it. He has a glossary, I have a glossary, but you don't need it nearly as much as some of the other novels that have been written, modern military novels, where they just put a clunky, this is what the MQ-4 Triton does, blah, 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 blah. It has a range of blah, 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 blah. And those things take you out of the story. If you can weave the explanation in through visuals, he set the topsails and he set the topgallants and great sheets of canvas spread to the wind. It creates that visual of
what those
things are and how it looks.
Yeah.
And terrific job.
Yeah.
And then the workshop I took was from Gail Carlin. She had R.D. Carden. She had a discussion on technical, and she made us write, how would you describe something in your book? Well, the boiler was blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Now read it and get rid of all the technical jargon and explain it so a reader can understand it who has no idea what a boiler does.
Right.
And it was terrific. It was eye-opening.
Robin's great. As a pilot, she had to do that with her own books.
Yes. Yeah, she based it all on what she had to do.
Yeah, I had her on this podcast as well, and we talked a little about that, because you got to be careful with that. You can completely pull your reader out of the story if you have too much of it or not enough.
Yeah, and it's a tight balance between the two.
Yeah. Do you still have a glossary? Do you keep that handy whenever you need it? Or
I do. I've got it in the back of the book because there's some people who want to pursue it a little bit deeper too.
Yeah.
And it gives them a baseline from which they can do their Google searches.
Do you do the cool thing where you put like a map in the front too? Like,
I didn't in this one.
No?
I'm going
Okay.
to in the next one.
All right.
And the next one will also have diagrams of sailing ships. And
that's great.
Yeah.
I love those things. I love a little map in the front. Those are always fun. Those are really quick. This is part of a trilogy. Is this one of?
It is book one of a trilogy.
Okay.
It's also book one of a series.
Okay.
I want to follow this family through American history
Oh, fun.
as they serve in the Navy.
Oh, that's cool. So are you considering multiple trilogies based on?
Probably not multiple trilogies. This one will be a trilogy.
Books? Okay.
I think the War of 1812 will probably be a trilogy.
Okay.
But most of the rest will be standalones.
That's great.
World War II will end up being a trilogy just because it's such a broad, and by that point there'll be 3 or 4 members of the family involved.
Oh yeah, interesting. It's so much fun to have multiple books already planned out. Like all I got to do is write it.
Right.
I don't have to think of it. I just got to write it.
And that sounds so easy.
It does sound easy, and I know I'm making it sound easy, and it is not. But like I have.
But it is fun. Yeah.
It is. It's great. I'm still coming up with short stories ideas, but I have like 20 short story ideas that are just waiting to be written. And I'm just like, I got to find the time to do this. I got to quit my day job.
That becomes the hard part, isn't it? Finding the time to sit down and do it.
It really is. And,
but it's a better problem to have, right?
It's a good problem to have for sure.
Yeah.
Is that I don't have time to write, there's so many people who don't have time to do much more, I guess, bigger things. But for me, writing that is big. So when I don't have time to do it, I like I said earlier, I asked you earlier, I feel it. I get impatient. I get frustrated easily, like I don't sleep well. And, I feel it.
It's a passion. It's not a occupation.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And
it's more who you are than what you do.
Exactly. It's not a career. It is who I am as a person. So you mentioned earlier having characters that you like to focus on the humanity aspect of the characters and things. I'm curious, what is it about human nature that draws you to it so much?
I like to see how people react in situations outside the norm.
Okay.
Everybody has their normal circumstances and how they'll behave. But when you thrust people who are very ordinary in every other way into unusual or emergency or crisis situations, that it was always fascinating. When my ship went into combat the first time, we had some folks that I would not have expected had some issues dealing with the fear and the uncertainty. And conversely, there were people that I was not sure would stay on their posts that stepped up and performed magnificently. And so for me, that was not a wake up call, but an epiphany that allowed me to think about how to create characters that would behave in ways that entertained and also maybe let people see inside themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. Have you always been drawn to stories that have that kind of character depth or arch?
I had not thought about it until recently, with the last couple of years. But actually, I have. I think that's one of the things that drew me to the C.S. Forester Hornblower series and some of his other books. There was a great book called The Good Shepherd, that Tom Hanks made into a movie, The Greyhound.
Oh, I didn't know that was a book. Okay.
That was a book, C.S. Forester. And he wrote it after he had spent part of World War II riding Navy destroyers.
Yeah.
And it was extremely accurate technically and with respect to destroyer operations. But all of Forester's characters were deeply flawed people. And when he put them into bizarre or unusual or dangerous situations, they either found it in themselves to react well, or in some of his secondary characters, they performed very, very poorly.
Yeah.
And that always drew me to those kinds of stories.
What do deeply flawed characters do for a story? I mean, outside of being, someone who's not flawed, a boring character, like what does that do for a story?
I think it allows the reader to connect more with them.
Okay.
All of us, whether we admit it openly or not, have our significant flaws and we have our foibles. I tend to be a pretty nervous person, and I like reading about a character who's a nervous, maybe doesn't have real good self-confidence, and how they react and step up and behave well in a given situation.
It's a connection thing.
It's absolutely a connection thing.
Yeah. Do you write poetry?
I did when I was in high school and college, and I stopped.
Okay.
And I've thought about going back and dabbling in it again.
The reason I ask is I think this is my theory. There's nothing proven in it. My theory is that poets are a little more attuned to the flaws in human nature. I think other writers can be, but a lot of poetry dives into why we're feeling this way.
I could see that. Yeah.
So I know that's a pretty bold statement, I guess, to make, but I think a lot of poets are they've spent so much time digging into a feeling and writing about it that they can grab onto it a little, they connect with it a little more.
I could absolutely see that. I think back to I didn't read widely. Robert Louis Stevenson was probably the poet that I read the most. But I think you're right. I think they have an insight or develop an insight into humanity and the conditions that maybe other writers don't always get.
Yeah, I think memoirists can do it.
Memoirists, I think, have to do it if they're going to do a good job at it.
Yeah. Do you know Leslie Ferguson? You know Leslie.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Every time we talk about memoirs, I'm like, yeah, but have you read Leslie Ferguson's book? Because that one is a tap into all of that.
It is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
There's a few. It's Acorn published again.
Again, another Acorn. I've known her longer than I've known Acorn, so I'm gonna stake my claim to that one there.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I appreciate memoirists. I don't think I'll write one. I can't do nonfiction. Like I don't know how deep into sci-fi I could get. So the world building in it is just too much for me. So I'm curious how different or how often an author will dive into a different genre.
I have considered science fiction because I loved it growing up so much. But what is daunting is exactly what you said, the world building. I have thought briefly about mysteries because I love reading them. And I just finished Matt Coyle's series.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
Is it?
And it's set in San Diego. So what could be better?
Yeah. Probably pretty familiar scenes, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But the concept of having to build the case, and I've, heard workshops, do you build the end result and then figure out how to get there, or do you build the path and get to the end result?
Yes.
There are people who, exactly. There are people who pontificate about both. It's beyond me, and I know better. And romance that's not even an option for me.
Well, I will say this. Speaking of romance, I was in this short story class a month or so ago by an author named Matt Bell, and he started talking about a story type called the meet cute. And it's a romance story, but there's different ways of how the characters interact with each other in a meet cute story. And I was like, I would never write a meet cute. And then I thought about it, and I was like, oh shit, I have written a meet cute. One I just wrote and
really?
Working on, and I didn't even realize it.
Oh wow,
no idea. And I was like, well, I guess I've written some kind of romance.
I will tell you what my editor told me. And I went to one of her workshops about romance writing because she's right. Almost every story is a love story somewhere along the line. And both of my books are there. You might call them bromances.
Yeah.
Because there are relationships among the male characters.
Yeah.
And you have to capture those authentically.
Yes.
Because if you don't, you lose readers.
That's an interesting point that she made. That there's I mean, even a lack of relationship would show that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that would also have an impact on that character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's how we react within our human community.
Yeah.
If you have no relationships, you are probably sitting in a cave someplace.
Yes. Yeah. And that is an interesting character on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've seen Castaway. You mentioned family in the other trilogies. How important is family to you personally when you're writing, and also in your characters in your books?
Family comes first for me. I spent too many years where family was second. In the Navy. We were talking about that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I have decided that in retirement, that's got to be number one.
Yeah.
And so if it comes down to writing or not writing, because I've got a family thing, I do the family thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as a result, family to me is important for my characters. The captain of my ship in the first book is divorced, but he has a brother who he finds out later was killed in the first attack by the Chinese, and his brother has a wife and kids.
Okay.
And so that becomes, it doesn't show up a lot in the book, but it's in the back of his mind, how he's going to fight to defend them.
Yeah.
And the first thing he does when he gets back is go visit them and make sure they're okay. And then he goes to the place where his brother was killed and watches as the rubble is being removed.
Okay.
So family is definitely important to my characters as well.
Yeah. And it plays a role in character development too,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just how we are as just in human life, in real life, I guess. Our families certainly impacted how we behave, and get through it. So it's got to have an effect on characters as well.
Yeah. And the stories that you hear as you're growing up in family, I honestly wish I had listened way more to my dad and his brothers and sisters when they talked, and my mother and her sisters. But even so, I am working on a World War II novel, and it's based on, I sat in the agent panel years ago, and the agents are always asked, what's popular? And the partial answer was World War I and World War II stories. And I thought, I got nothing. And then I realized my dad was in the Army. 3 uncles were in the Navy. And one of my uncles survived the Bataan Death March and 3.5 years in a Japanese prison camp.
Oh, my goodness.
I had a story.
Yeah.
So fictionalized it to be able to create dialogue, and loosely, very, very loosely based on their lives.
Yeah.
But again, that's a family. How do they deal with the separations? How do they deal with the fact that one of their brothers appears to may be dead, may not be dead? They have no idea because the Japanese didn't tell us who they'd captured for months.
Yeah.
And so examining that is just, to me, fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot, especially if it's military related. Family is such a big part of, it's another side of the story. That I don't know how often it gets written about. I guess I don't read a lot of books that involve military, but
it doesn't get written about very much.
No. Well, why are you including it in yours?
Because I think that, so one of the things that I like, or that I want to explore, is areas that have not been broadly explored in
Yeah.
fiction.
Yeah.
So one of my characters in that World War II novel, my dad did not go to North Africa, but one of them is going to go to North Africa because the fighting against Rommel's Africa Corps is not well covered in fiction. And then the fighting up through Sicily and the boot of Italy.
Okay.
The Navy war in the Pacific has been fairly well covered, but there are elements of it that haven't. And so
Yeah.
that my Navy character is going to go explore those. And I've read 3 or 4 nonfiction books about Japanese POWs. I haven't read any fiction. And so I think there's 1 or 2 probably out there,
Yeah.
but I haven't.
Interesting. Do you know, this is going to sound weird, but do you know if there are Japanese authors writing about that?
After the war, there were a number of Japanese authors who wrote about their war experiences,
Okay.
but they were things like Japanese destroyer captain and Japanese submarine commander,
Yeah.
and they focused on the war fighting. As far as I know, there's never been anything written about the prisoner of war experience or the things that happened to the prisoners of war.
That's fascinating stuff. If it's not out there, write it. You know.
There's one guy, P.T. Duderman, who had written a very small portion of one book. He had
Yeah.
a character who was captured
Okay.
and who witnessed the bombing of Hiroshima from a Japanese prison camp.
Wow.
And he's the only one I know of that's covered that.
I sometimes when I teach my podcasting classes, people will ask, well, what if my podcast, my idea is already being done? I said, listen to it, find what they're not doing, and do that.
Makes sense.
You know, like fill a hole. There's space enough for it. And if you want to do the same thing, fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. But if you're looking for some kind of originality, just listen to what's out there and just do what you're not finding. You know, and maybe that's how I've lived my thing.
Mhm.
You know, but
But it makes perfect sense.
well, why not? The people will find it and find you.
That's right. And
Yeah.
your approach is going to be different, even if you're. How many people write romance?
Right.
There are tons.
Right.
But your approach is going to be unique to you. And so someone is going to be out there who likes it and reads it.
Yeah, maybe we can write a memoir. Who knows?
You could,
Who
yes.
knows? Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up. One more question for you.
Okay.
If there was one book or story or anything creative you wish you wrote, what would it be?
Oh, that's a difficult question. No, Harry Potter does not jump to mind.
No. Okay. Okay.
I love the books, but no, it doesn't. And maybe this inspired me to do the series. Well, actually, probably Herman Wouk's Winds of War
Okay.
and War and Remembrance.
Yeah.
And I think that probably inspired me to do the World War II novel.
Really?
The way I'm doing it. Yeah.
What was it about them?
I loved that he inserted his main character into famously historical settings.
Okay.
So his main character was a Navy captain, and this Navy captain met with Roosevelt and with Secretary of State, Secretary of War. He met Hitler at one point, but he never. It was how he reacted or how he reported back on the events he was participating in,
Okay.
that without being an intrusive presence, that fascinated me.
Okay. I bet you're a fan of Forrest Gump.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Because that sounds exactly when you were saying it. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, why am I thinking of Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
That
Another
just
character that's
inserted into all these
Yeah.
famous events that
Yeah.
happen. So
and he gets to show how other people were reacting to the things that were going on at the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know if this happened in the Herman Wouk stuff, but I with at least the Forrest Gump, the smiley face on the shirt, you know, and the shit happens and the bumper sticker, you know, like those things, all these things we know from real life. It was like, wait, did that guy create it? You know, kind of a stuff. So I love that you gave that example. I remember seeing those books on my parents' bookshelves. So those were popular books.
Yeah, I think I read them maybe when I was in 8th grade the first time.
Yeah.
And then I've reread them 3 or 4 times
I was
since.
going to ask if you've reread them. Yeah.
I come back to certain books
Do you?
multiple times. Yeah.
Why do you do that?
I love the characters, and
Okay.
I love the settings, but mostly the characters. And I love rereading. Horned Lore is one. Patrick O'Brien's series is another. The Wouk books.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you
Asimov.
do you have any Do you have any like aspirations that you would want people to read your book multiple times, or do you just put it out there and whoever reads it kind of a thing?
I've been asked this a couple times in the last few months, and for me, success is a reader, I don't care who, reads it and sets it down afterwards and says, wow, I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Whether they reread it or not, I haven't honestly even thought about. I just,
Okay.
I count success one reader at a time. I'm definitely not in this to make money.
Sure. Sure.
It's something I have to do. I can't
Yeah.
not write.
Yeah.
I can't not tell stories, even to myself.
Somerset Maugham said, "We do not write because we want to. We write because we have to."
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Yep.
You know,
you
so
understand that, yeah.
I feel it. It'll wake me up in the middle of the night. you
Yes.
know? And I'm just like, well, if I have to write this down, or I'm not going to sleep.
Yeah, you probably have the same thing I do. I've got a notepad and pencil right next to the bed.
So I will say this. I gave up writing on paper a long time ago because I'm left-handed.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just so tired of the ink and the whatever on my hand, and I'm like, you know what? I'll just write it on my phone. I'll just write the line down on my phone, and then I'll just go back to sleep. And then in the morning, I'll check my notes app, and I'll look like, okay, here we are. But I can't. But yes, I have something available because I have to.
To make those notes, because you can't risk losing them, right?
Oh, I know. Well, and there are some, I don't know if it's happened to you. I'm sure it has. Every writer has some ideas where you're just like, I don't know where that came from. I'm just going to shove that under the rug a little bit. Yeah.
The light of day sometimes makes things a little more ugly, or reveals the ugliness that's
turning
out
on
there.
a bar at 2:01 a.m. Turning the lights in a bar. You're just like, oh, these are what everybody looks like. So anyway, but
don't want to see that.
No. Nobody does either, really. Yeah. And I won't let anyone see some of the stuff I put down. But, well, Tom, I am really glad we did this. I'm really looking forward to all these books that you are going to write. They sound fascinating.
Thanks. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity. This was fun.